The air inside Buckingham Palace was heavy that morning, not with the ceremony of tradition, but with the silence that only betrayal can breed. Guards shifted nervously in the corridors. Phones buzzed with encrypted messages. Behind the tall, arched doors of the king's private study, something irreversible was about to happen. The monarch, a father torn between his crown and his blood, had finally decided. Prince Harry would no longer be a prince. It was a moment years in the making. But no one expected the blow to land this hard, or this publicly. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What could drive a father to strike such a final hammer against his own son? What line could Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have possibly crossed that the King of England would not only strip their titles, but expel them from the royal fold entirely? Those were the questions burning across the kingdom as the royal decree hit the morning headlines. King Charles revokes Harry's royal titles. Sussex no more. Exiled from the monarchy. The media exploded, and within hours, a secondary shockwave followed. Earl Charles Spencer, Princess Diana's brother, broke his silence with words that would slice deeper than any royal reprimand. His statement echoed through the tabloids. Never in our genealogy will the name of Spencer be used to disguise disgrace. And just like that, a new chapter of royal chaos began. Because in the shadows of this decision, another story was unfolding, one that the palace hoped would never see daylight. Harry and Meghan, now desperate to rebuild their image, had allegedly taken their plea to the Spencers, requesting permission to adopt the late Princess Diana's maiden name. The idea, according to insiders, was simple. If the crown would no longer have them, they would become the heirs of Diana's legacy. But Earl Spencer didn't just refuse. He condemned. And his words struck at the heart of everything Harry believed his mother stood for. So how did we get here? What pushed King Charles to make the ultimate decision against his youngest son? And why did the Spencer family, Diana's bloodline, rise against the very child she once called my mischievous little boy? To understand this moment, we have to go back. Back to the early cracks in the royal foundation. Back to the long-simmering resentments that brewed beneath palace smiles and photo ops. Because while the world saw polished appearances and royal handshakes, behind the gilded walls, a quiet war was being waged between duty and rebellion, heritage and ego, legacy and betrayal. Let's rewind to the moment that loyalty turned into humiliation. For years, King Charles endured the endless storms stirred by his younger son. From Oprah's explosive interview to the Netflix docuseries that aired the monarchy's dirty laundry to millions worldwide, the king chose silence. He told aides that time would heal. He told William to show compassion. He told himself that Harry would one day remember who he was. But instead, each new revelation from California sliced another piece off the family bond. The breaking point didn't come overnight. It built like a pressure cooker, one scandal after another, one public embarrassment piled onto the next. Harry's memoir, Spare, was the spark that finally set the blaze. The book didn't just criticize the institution, it painted Charles as weak, Camilla as manipulative, and William as violent. "He's not my brother anymore," Harry reportedly said in one of the most damning passages. The world gasped, but the king stayed quiet. Until now. Behind the palace facade, sources say Charles felt humiliated, not by the attacks themselves, but by what came after. Because Harry didn't stop there. In private, he began taking meetings with Hollywood producers about rebranding his and Meghan's image as modern royalty. And that's when Meghan reportedly pitched the idea that would ignite royal outrage, to reclaim Diana's name, to become Harry and Meghan Spencer. At first glance, it sounded like a tribute, a poetic return to the mother who gave her life to humanize the crown. But inside the Spencer estate, the reaction was volcanic. Earl Spencer saw it as an act of exploitation, the ultimate manipulation of his sister's memory. "It's not legacy," one close family source said. "It's marketing." When the request reached him, the Earl's answer was swift and brutal. He refused to allow them to use the family name. And in a private note later leaked to the press, he wrote the now famous words, "Never in our genealogy will the Spencer name be a shield for scandal." That letter didn't just seal Meghan and Harry's exile from Diana's bloodline. It sealed their fate in the eyes of the monarchy. Back in London, the king reportedly took that as the final sign. If even Diana's brother had rejected Harry's actions, what chance was there left for reconciliation? Advisors had long warned Charles that the Sussex drama was damaging the monarchy's credibility abroad. But when the Spencer letter went public, the palace walls themselves began to shake. It was no longer just a family crisis, it was a constitutional one. And so, the hammer fell. On the morning of the royal decree, an internal memo circulated among the king's senior staff. It was short, formal, and devastating. Effective immediately, His Majesty's son, Henry Charles Albert David, shall be removed from all remaining royal patronages, styles, and privileges. That meant no HRH, no Duke of Sussex, no access to royal estates or public funding. Just Harry Windsor, a man without a title, a crest, or a crown. The impact was seismic. Within hours, the palace gates were surrounded by reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. Some cheered the decision, claiming it was long overdue. Others mourned it as the final collapse of Diana's dream for her sons. But the man at the center of it all was thousands of miles away, sitting in silence in Montecito, staring at his phone, realizing that his royal lineage had just been erased. Imagine the weight of that moment. Everything you were born into gone. The very name that once opened doors across continents now meant nothing. For Harry, it wasn't just a loss of title. It was an identity crisis. For Meghan, it was an opportunity, a new narrative to control. Sources close to the couple claim she saw the surname change as their path to rebirth. Diana's spirit lives through us, she allegedly said during a private call. If they don't want us as royals, we'll honor her another way. But those words would echo differently once Earl Spencer made his stance public. Because what Meghan saw as homage, he saw as heresy. Now the world was watching two forces collide. The monarchy defending its lineage, and the exiled couple trying to rewrite it. And in between stood the ghost of Diana, her legacy tugged from both sides like a sacred relic. But this wasn't just about names and titles. It was about power. About the very definition of what it means to be royal in an era where loyalty can be traded for followers, and truth is just a matter of PR spin. Could a monarchy survive when its own bloodline turns against it? Could a son who walked away from the throne ever find peace outside its shadow? The king, sources say, didn't act out of anger. He acted out of exhaustion. He can forgive almost anything, one former aide revealed. But he cannot forgive dishonor to the crown. To Charles, Meghan and Harry had not only abandoned duty, they had commodified it. And that was unforgivable. Still, behind the coldness of the decree, there was heartbreak. Those who know Charles described the moment he signed the removal order as one of deep sorrow. He reportedly paused before putting pen to paper and whispered, "For the sake of the crown." That whisper, overheard by an aide, would later leak and become the title of every tabloid headline that week. For the sake of the crown. The phrase became a symbol of the monarchy's survival instinct and its emotional cost. A father's sacrifice for his duty. A son's fall from grace. A legacy torn between two worlds. Meanwhile, in California, a different scene played out. Meghan allegedly reacted to the news with fury. Her team prepared statements, social media drafts, and press calls. Insiders claimed she wanted to control the narrative before the palace did. Harry, on the other hand, withdrew completely. Friends described him as emotionally broken, confused, and haunted by his mother's memory. And yet, even as the world sympathized with his pain, the Spencers' rejection cut deeper. Because when your mother's family disowns your choices, where do you turn? For Harry, the answer would lead him down a path that none of his ancestors had ever dared to tread. As the cameras rolled and experts debated, a darker truth began to surface. Whispers of secret legal filings, hidden family letters, and an emotional confrontation between Harry and Earl Spencer that would redefine the story. Some claim it ended in tears. Others say it ended in rage. But everyone agrees, that meeting changed everything. And that's where our story truly begins. The moment when family loyalty collided with royal law. When bloodlines and betrayal became one and the same. Because this wasn't just another royal fallout. It was a generational reckoning. A monarchy fighting to preserve its ancient identity in a world that no longer boasts. A son rebelling against a system that raised him and losing everything in the process. And a king forced to choose between love and legacy. But even after the decree was signed, the royal crisis was far from over. There were secrets still hidden inside those palace walls. Private letters, forgotten promises, and one final act of defiance that would shake the Spencer family and the monarchy to its core. What Harry did next, and how the palace responded, would make history. And trust me, no one saw it coming. They say every monarch has a moment when the crown stops being a symbol of honor and becomes a weight too heavy to bear. For King Charles, that moment came alone, in the quiet confines of his private study, long before the world knew what was about to unfold. Have you ever watched someone hold it together for so long that when they finally snap, it's not loud, it's hauntingly quiet? That was Charles. No shouting, no broken glass, just silence. The kind that tells you something inside has finally shattered. Reports say he sat there, hands trembling, staring at a single piece of paper, the latest tabloid headline screaming Harry and Meghan's newest move. It wasn't the first betrayal, but it was the last straw. The House of Windsor cannot survive another humiliation, an aide whispered that day. And Charles, looking up from his desk, replied in a voice that no one had ever heard from him before. Then perhaps it's time it survives without him. That sentence would set off a chain of events no one in royal history could have predicted. But before that moment, there was a build-up, months of mounting tension behind the palace gates. Inside Buckingham, whispers traveled faster than light. Every aide, every security officer, every senior member knew that the king's patience was thinning. They'd seen it before, when Harry's memoir came out, when Netflix released intimate footage of Diana's grave, when Meghan mocked the royal hierarchy on live television. But this time, there was something more sinister behind the scenes. According to sources close to the king's inner circle, Charles had received a private recording. A leaked clip from one of Harry's closed-door conversations with a foreign journalist. In that audio, Harry reportedly questioned whether his father was fit to rule and accused him of hiding behind protocol while the family falls apart. Those words cut deep. Imagine your own child calling your life's work a fraud. Imagine it played back to you by someone you trusted. How would you react? For Charles, it wasn't just personal, it was political. The monarchy's entire future depends on public faith. And Harry's words weren't just rebellion. They were ammunition for the institution's critics. The day that audio reached the king, a palace insider says he canceled all appointments. The staff was dismissed early. Only his private secretary remained. For hours, Charles paced the study, repeating one line over and over, "I've tried. God knows, I've tried." Those who know him describe that evening as the moment he crossed from father to monarch, from love to law. But what no one realized at the time was that a confrontation had already been brewing. Because just days earlier, Harry had sent an unexpected letter, a direct message to his father. Short, cold, and defiant. "Since you no longer treat me as your son, perhaps it's best you treat me as your equal." That line sent shockwaves through the palace. Equal? In the hierarchy of monarchy, equality doesn't exist. To challenge that was to question the divine order that had held Britain's crown together for centuries. Charles didn't respond. Not immediately. He folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and told his aide, "I'll deal with it when the time comes." But that time came sooner than anyone expected. Because the very next day, photos surfaced, Harry and Meghan laughing on a California beach, holding hands, with a photographer from their upcoming docuseries in tow. The tagline leaked online, "A new kind of royal." It was that phrase, those 5 words, that reportedly pushed Charles to his breaking point. A new kind of royal. To him, that wasn't innovation, it was mockery. How could you claim royalty while rejecting everything it stands for? How could you sell the crown as content? The king called an emergency meeting that evening. Not in the Grand Council chambers. Not in public view. But in his private residence. Just him, Queen Camilla, and his closest advisors. Those present later described the atmosphere as funereal. Not even the ticking of the clock dared interrupt. Charles stood by the window, his reflection framed against the London skyline, and said quietly, "If the monarchy is to survive, one of us must fall." Camilla, trying to calm him, urged restraint. "He's still your son," she said. Charles turned sharply. "No," he replied. "He's a brand." That single sentence defined what came next. Because from that moment, it was no longer about reconciliation, it was about preservation. Behind closed doors, a dossier had already been compiled. Timelines, media coverage, and reports detailing how Harry and Meghan's ventures had monetized royal connections. Some of it, palace aides claimed, bordered on constitutional breach, invoking royal status for commercial gain. The king reviewed every page, slowly, silently, until he reached one that changed everything. A legal draft showing the couple's application to trademark Spencer Royal Foundation. He froze. That wasn't just another PR stunt. That was Diana's name, his former wife, the woman who haunted every moment of his reign, being turned into an enterprise by the very son she raised. When he looked up, his eyes were red. "Enough," he whispered. That word, enough, was all his secretary needed. Within 24 hours, a plan was in motion. Legal teams began drafting the framework for the unprecedented act, the full removal of Prince Harry's remaining titles and privileges. The staff called it the final strike. But before Charles could make it official, he had to face one more test. A call came through from Prince William. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't polite. "Father," William reportedly began, "you can't let this keep happening. Every day, he drags us down. You know what Mother would say." That hit Charles hard. Diana's memory was the one ghost that ruled them all. For years, the king had been haunted by the belief that he'd failed her, that her spirit lingered in every public judgment he faced. And now her own son was being used against him. He asked William, "Do you hate him?" William paused. "No, but I don't recognize him anymore." That silence stretched. And when the call ended, Charles knew the decision had to be made. That night, the king didn't sleep. He went for a walk through the private gardens, past the statue of Queen Victoria, the cold air biting through his coat. A single guard followed from a distance. The king was seen muttering to himself, gripping his wedding band as if seeking divine approval. Finally, he looked up at the palace flag, the eternal symbol of monarchy, and murmured, "For the crown, not the blood." The next morning, the order was signed. Inside the palace, aides were instructed to maintain total silence. But word spreads fast in the corridors of power. By noon, half the staff already knew. "It's done," someone whispered. "He's out." In Montecito, the story hadn't broken yet. Harry was reportedly working on his next charity speech when his phone buzzed. A message from a UK number. 2 sentences. No emotion. "Your royal duties have been revoked. His Majesty wishes you peace." Peace. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The word peace, arriving right before a storm. When Meghan found out, she reportedly screamed. Not out of shock, but outrage. Her team rushed to prepare a response, crafting the narrative before the British press could define it. She was said to have called her PR head, shouting, "They can't do this to him. They can't erase Diana's son." But in London, that was exactly what was happening. Still, for Charles, the aftermath wasn't relief. It was regret. Those who saw him that day say he looked older, drained, hollow, almost smaller under the weight of the crown. He told one aide, "I've lost both my sons. One to duty, one to pride." But this wasn't the end. Because as the news broke, a second story began unfolding in parallel, one the king hadn't anticipated. Earl Spencer, Diana's brother, had been watching quietly from the sidelines. He'd avoided royal drama for years, focusing on preserving his sister's legacy at Althorpe. But when word reached him that Meghan and Harry were attempting to adopt the Spencer name to shield themselves from the fallout, his restraint vanished. In an email that would later shake the monarchy, the Earl reportedly wrote, "You may erase titles, but you will not rewrite genealogy." That message, leaked hours later, hit the headlines faster than the royal decree itself. The Spencer family had drawn their line in the sand. And that's when the entire story shifted, from a father's heartbreak to a family feud between 2 dynasties, Windsor and Spencer. As Charles faced the consequences of his own decision, another truth began to emerge, something hidden deep in Diana's past, something that Earl Spencer had vowed to protect even from her sons. Because according to insiders, his anger wasn't just about the name. It was about a secret buried within Diana's lineage, one that could destroy the very narrative Meghan and Harry were trying to claim. And if that secret ever came out, the monarchy wouldn't be the only thing in danger. The royal family has weathered wars, divorces, assassinations, and scandals that would have destroyed any other dynasty. But never before had a king summoned an emergency council not to save the crown, but to decide the fate of his own son. It was a cold, gray morning when the call went out. Discreet invitations, handwritten by the king's private secretary, were delivered to only 6 individuals. The words were brief. By His Majesty's request, your presence is required at Clarence House at 10 o'clock. Confidential matters of succession. No explanations. No leaks. Not even Camilla knew what was coming until that morning. But as the frost settled over London, a different kind of chill swept through the monarchy. Because behind those closed doors, the king was preparing to do something unthinkable, to put blood second and the institution first. Let me ask you this. What would you do if your own child became your greatest liability? Would you protect them at the cost of everything you've built? Or would you cut them loose before they destroy you? That's the choice King Charles faced that morning. And as the council gathered, the weight of that choice filled the room like thunder waiting to break. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy oak doors shut. No cameras, no press, just 6 of the most powerful people in the realm. Queen Camilla, Prince William, Princess Anne, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chamberlain, and Sir Edward Young, Charles's most trusted advisor. The king began without ceremony. "We are not here to debate emotion," he said. "We are here to preserve the crown." Every eye in the room fixed on him. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his notes. But his voice, low, cold, deliberate, carried the authority of centuries. For the first 10 minutes, he said nothing about Harry by name. Instead, he spoke of duty, honor, and lineage, the trinity that defines the monarchy. "We exist," he said, "because the people believe in what we represent. If that belief dies, so do we." Then he paused, drew a deep breath, and continued. "And what my son has done," he said, "is to turn our sacred trust into a transaction." Camilla shifted uneasily in her chair. William kept his eyes down. Only Princess and, ever the stoic soldier of the family, leaned forward and said what no one else dared to. "Then it's time, Charles. You know it is." Those 5 words, "You know it is," cracked the silence like glass. The Archbishop of Canterbury cleared his throat, warning against haste. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "it is not for man to unmake what God ordained. He is your son." Charles's reply was chilling. God also gave man the power to choose. There it was, the heart of the matter. A king choosing between divine order and paternal love. Documents were laid out across the table. A timeline of Harry's public remarks, legal summaries of his commercial activities, and reports from diplomatic attaches detailing how foreign governments had begun questioning whether Harry still represented the crown. "Every day this continues," Sir Edward said. "We lose another inch of credibility. The monarchy cannot be mocked by its own blood." William finally spoke. "We've forgiven him too many times. Every time we do, he twists it into another headline." Camilla hesitated before adding, "He's not just attacking the monarchy. He's attacking you, Charles. He's painting you as weak." The king turned toward the window, his reflection fractured by the pane's light. "Perhaps I am," he said quietly. "But weakness cannot rule a kingdom." Outside, the bells of Westminster chimed. Inside, history was being rewritten. The council debated for nearly 3 hours. The Archbishop argued mercy and argued for action. William demanded finality. Camilla pleaded for caution. But ultimately, it was Charles's voice that ended the argument. He stood, removed his glasses, and placed them on the table. "This family has survived execution, abdication, and scandal," he said. "We will not fall to self-inflicted humiliation." Then, with absolute calm, he issued the command, "Prepare the edict." That phrase, "prepare the edict," would later be whispered in palace corridors like a curse. It meant one thing: formal removal from royal status. Not suspension, not exile, erasure. The Lord Chamberlain nodded solemnly. "Yes, Your Majesty." William exhaled, relief mixed with sadness, and gave a curt nod. The Archbishop crossed himself silently. The decision was made. But the meeting wasn't over. Because the king had one final directive, one that would send shockwaves far beyond the family. He turned to his advisors and said, "Before we announce anything, I want to know everything. Every plan, every contact, every attempt they've made to exploit the Spencer name. Nothing is off limits." That single order unleashed a covert royal investigation, one that would later uncover private communications, leaked drafts, and even legal petitions linked to Harry and Meghan's attempt to trademark the Spencer legacy. Within a week, investigators had gathered a file thick enough to fill a briefcase. They called it Operation Lineage. And the findings? They were explosive. The documents revealed that Meghan's team had already begun negotiating deals under the name Spencer Royal Foundation, portraying the couple as continuing Diana's humanitarian spirit. There were even outlines for a planned documentary titled Spencer, The New Legacy. To the king, this wasn't tribute, it was theft. To Earl Spencer, it was something worse, desecration. When the king learned of these plans, he reportedly slammed his hand against the desk and muttered, "They're selling my past to fund their future." Those who witnessed that moment said it was the angriest they'd ever seen him. But beneath the fury was heartbreak. The pain of a man watching his son weaponize the very memory that once tore the royal family apart. At that point, Princess Anne stood and said, "You must make it official. There can be no going back." And so, the council adjourned. But before they left, the archbishop made one final plea. "If you remove him, you must give him a path to redemption. Otherwise, you'll create a martyr." Charles looked at him long and hard. He made his choice. Let him live with it. That was it. No more debate. The council dispersed, their faces pale and grim. Outside, photographers waited, oblivious to what had just been decided behind those ancient walls. Hours later, the first quiet ripples reached Harry's representatives. An anonymous call from a royal aide warned them, "Something's coming, bigger than you think." But in Montecito, the warning was dismissed as palace bluff. Meghan, ever the strategist, was already crafting her countermove. She reportedly told her inner circle, "If they take our titles, we'll take Diana's." That night, as London slept, two worlds prepared for war, one armed with centuries of royal law, the other with cameras and contracts. Meanwhile, Earl Spencer had begun receiving his own flurry of messages. Reporters, publicists, and even members of Meghan's extended team had reached out, asking for a statement. For days, he said nothing, until one morning, a simple email left his estate. Its subject line read, "Genealogy." The message was short, sharp, and final. "The Spencer legacy is not a brand. It is a lineage, and I will not see it diluted for profit." Those words would ignite a firestorm, but they also reached the king's desk within hours. When Charles read them, something inside him shifted. "He's right," he said quietly. "It ends here." The official royal decree was now only days away. Drafted in secret, sealed with crimson wax, and prepared for presentation before the Privy Council. But as the machinery of monarchy began moving, something else stirred, a shadow of regret in the king's heart. Those close to him say he began carrying an old photograph in his jacket pocket, a picture of him and young Harry at Balmoral, smiling, carefree, before duty divided them. He would take that photo out every night, stare at it for a few seconds, and whisper, "I'm sorry." And yet, the next morning, the work continued. Letters were finalized, signatures confirmed, preparations made for the public announcement. Still, one lingering question haunted the palace halls. Would the monarchy survive this? Royal historians warned that exiling a son could spark public sympathy, just as it did when Edward VIII abdicated. But Charles was adamant. "This is not abdication," he told his aides. "This is correction." Correction, that was his word. He saw it not as vengeance, but as purification, a cleansing of the royal bloodline from scandal, a message to history that this monarchy would not bend to celebrity, no matter how charming or tragic the figures involved. But even the king couldn't foresee what would happen next, because as the royal edict was being printed, a courier arrived from Althorpe, Earl Spencer's ancestral home. Inside the sealed envelope was something that would complicate everything. A copy of a forgotten letter written by Princess Diana herself, dated weeks before her death. It was addressed to her brother, Charles Spencer, and its contents would make the king's decision far more dangerous than he ever imagined. That letter began with 6 haunting words, "If they turn against my son." But what came next would turn the royal crisis into a generational reckoning, one that would test the boundaries of blood, legacy, and love itself. The news hit Montecito like a thunderclap. One moment, Meghan Markle was sitting in her sunlit living room, sipping green juice and scrolling through production notes for her next wellness project. The next, the alert flashed across her phone. King Charles strips Prince Harry of all royal titles. Her hand froze midair. The glass trembled slightly. Witnesses later said her face turned pale before twisting into disbelief. Then came the anger. "He actually did it," she said, voice sharp, cutting through the California calm. "He really did it." That was the day Meghan's strategy shifted from damage control to war. Let's be honest, Meghan was never one to back down quietly. Every setback was a branding opportunity. Every humiliation could be flipped into a redemption arc. But this time, something was different. This wasn't just a royal snub, it was an identity crisis. Without the Duke and Duchess titles, she and Harry weren't just demoted, they were dismantled. So, she turned to the one thing she knew best: narrative. Control the story, and you control the sympathy. Lose the story, and you become the villain. And that's when she came up with what palace insiders now call the Spencer strategy. But before we dive into that plan, let's rewind just a little. Because to understand Meghan's move, we have to understand the psychology behind it. For years, Meghan had studied Diana, not just as a tragic figure, but as a brand. The way she dressed, the way she spoke, the way she made the world fall in love with her vulnerability. Meghan had watched every documentary, memorized every quote, and privately told producers that Diana was the blueprint. So when King Charles erased their titles, she saw it not as exile, but as opportunity. "If we can't be Windsors," she allegedly told a close confidant, "then we'll be Spencers." That sentence would trigger one of the most audacious rebranding attempts in modern royal history. Within 48 hours, her PR team convened a secret meeting in Los Angeles. The agenda: reinvent the Sussexes under a new lineage. Notes from that meeting later leaked, revealing the proposed tagline: "Honoring Diana's legacy, the Spencers return." Sounds harmless, right? But behind the glossy phrasing was a much bolder ambition. Meghan wasn't just paying homage to Diana. She was positioning herself as her successor. The plan was simple on paper, but explosive in execution. Step 1. Adopt the Spencer surname. Step 2. Launch a foundation under the Spencer name to signal continuity of Diana's humanitarian work. Step 3. Release a limited docuseries centered not on royalty, but on family, resilience, and love through loss. But here's the twist. That project was already in motion before the king's decree. Hidden behind non-disclosure clauses, Netflix executives had reportedly greenlit the concept months earlier under the working title Spencer, a modern legacy. In Meghan's mind, this wasn't rebellion, it was reinvention. But to the monarchy, it was provocation on a biblical scale. When news of the rebranding leaked back to London, royal advisors were stunned. The king's private secretary reportedly muttered, "She's weaponizing Diana's memory." Prince William, upon hearing it, is said to have slammed his fist on the table, whispering under his breath, "She's doing it again." But Meghan didn't see it that way. To her, the Spencers represented purity, the untarnished bloodline that the Windsors had allegedly betrayed. She wanted to rewrite history, positioning herself and Harry as the true heirs to Diana's emotional legacy. It was brilliant PR, but dangerous politics. So she began making calls. To lawyers, to brand managers, to one person in particular, Earl Charles Spencer. That's right, she reached out directly to Diana's brother. According to sources close to the Spencer estate, the first contact came through an intermediary. A polite email. Respectful tone. She claimed she wanted to honor Diana's name through modern humanitarian work. The Earl, cautious but curious, requested more details. What he received next stunned him. Attached to the email was a fully designed mock-up of a logo, the Spencer Foundation. In gold lettering, beneath a minimalist crest, were the words, "A new chapter of compassion." Beneath that, Harry's signature. Earl Spencer's reaction? Fury. To him, this wasn't homage. It was trespass. The Spencer name wasn't a brand to license or trademark. It was centuries of bloodline and heritage. And the fact that Meghan and Harry had used his sister's memory as the foundation of a media project felt like a personal violation. He immediately replied, curt, formal, unmistakably angry. "The Spencer name is not yours to adopt. You are not entitled to it." But Meghan, ever the negotiator, didn't back off. She reportedly called him personally, asking for a chance to explain. What followed, according to palace insiders, was one of the most tense phone calls in modern royal history. Meghan began with charm. She spoke of Diana's compassion, her warmth, her misunderstood brilliance. "I feel her spirit guiding us," she said. "Harry feels it too. We just want to continue what she started." But the Earl interrupted her. "You want to own what she started?" he said coldly. "There's a difference." Witnesses say Meghan paused, her tone sharpening. "You of all people should understand what it's like to have your family name erased," she replied. "We're just trying to give it life again." The Earl didn't answer immediately. Then he said the words that would later appear in his public statement. "Never in our genealogy will the name of Spencer be used to disguise disgrace." During the uproar, Earl Spencer began reviewing his sister's old letters and recordings, private notes Diana had written in her final months. Among them was one that mentioned her sons and her growing fears for their future. One passage, in particular, stood out. It read, "If they ever turn my children into symbols, remind them that love cannot be sold." When the Earl read those words, his resolve hardened. He decided that the world needed to hear the truth, not the Hollywood version, not the royal PR version, but Diana's own. And so he authorized a private letter, one written by Diana to him in the summer of 1997, to be referenced publicly for the first time. He didn't release the full contents, only the opening line. "If they turn against my son, remind them that forgiveness is the only redemption." It was a cryptic sentence, but its impact was immediate. It reframed the entire conflict. The media that had painted Harry as a villain now wondered if he was, in fact, fulfilling a tragic prophecy. Was the monarchy repeating history, punishing another of Diana's children for stepping out of line? The king reportedly reacted with fury when he heard the letter's existence had been confirmed. "He's weaponizing her words," Charles said bitterly. "He's reopening wounds that never healed." But privately, he knew those words hit too close to home. Because that single sentence, "Forgiveness is the only redemption," sliced through his conviction like a blade. What if, in trying to protect the monarchy, he had destroyed the last link to his son? For the next week, royal aides described the atmosphere at Buckingham as spiritually heavy. Meetings felt subdued. Even Camilla kept her distance. The king was said to spend hours alone in the chapel, lighting candles for both Diana and Harry. But it was too late to turn back. The wheels of royal law were already in motion. And as the palace prepared for the official announcement, Earl Spencer did something even more unexpected. He wrote a letter, not to the king, not to William, but directly to Harry. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was pleading. "My dear boy," it began. "There was a time when I saw your mother's light in you. I hope you find it again before the darkness consumes you. Please understand, this isn't about punishment. It's about preservation. Of her, of us, of you." He signed it simply, "Your uncle, Charles." Harry reportedly never replied. But he kept the letter on his desk for days, unread but never thrown away. That was the quiet tragedy beneath the headlines. A family tearing itself apart not with hatred, but with heartbreak. And as the royal edict neared, both the monarchy and the Spencers prepared for fallout. Yet neither side knew what was coming next. Because hidden among Diana's letters, one document remained sealed. One that Earl Spencer had never revealed to anyone. A document that hinted at a secret pact between Diana and the then Prince of Wales. A pact made before their divorce was finalized. That document, insiders say, could redefine everything. The meaning of legacy, the truth about Diana's last wishes, and the real reason King Charles finally chose to act. You think you've heard everything about Diana, don't you? Every secret, every heartbreak, every whispered conversation that the cameras never caught. But what if I told you there was one final message, a pact, made not in front of lawyers or reporters, but in the private shadows between a woman who feared her legacy would be twisted and the man who would one day wear the crown? That pact, long buried in sealed archives, was the missing piece of this royal catastrophe. Because it didn't just predict the current crisis, it warned of it. The story begins in 1996, months before Diana's divorce was finalized. The atmosphere between her and then Prince Charles was glacial. Communication had reduced to legal notes and strained silence. Leaked memos from her production team revealed that the upcoming documentary would include previously unseen footage of Diana, material obtained through old interviews and repurposed through AI restoration. The goal? to connect Diana's legacy to modern motherhood and humanitarian leadership, with Meghan as the narrative bridge. In other words, Diana reborn through Meghan's voice. When the palace got wind of this, everything changed. Legal letters were drafted. Calls were made. The Spencer estate threatened injunctions. Netflix quietly began reconsidering its involvement. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team scrambled to contain the fallout. "They don't understand what we're doing," she told a friend. "This isn't exploitation, it's evolution." But the damage was done. Earl Spencer's fury only grew. And when he finally spoke publicly, his words hit the monarchy like cannon fire. "I have watched in silence long enough," he said in a televised statement. "The Spencer name carries duty, not marketing. It was born from sacrifice, not self-promotion. I will not see it used to rewrite history." Those words reverberated across the world. The public divided instantly. Some supported Meghan, calling her effort a continuation of Diana's humanitarian heart. Others accused her of grifting on grief. Through it all, Meghan remained outwardly calm. But behind closed doors, she was furious. "They've always underestimated me," she reportedly told her inner circle. "They think this will break me. Watch me rebuild bigger." And rebuild she did, but not in the way anyone expected. Because just as the royal family prepared to issue the formal edict removing Harry's titles, Meghan made a move so bold it left even her critics stunned. She reached out, not to Earl Spencer again, but to someone else with far more power over Diana's image than the family itself.